Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good after midnight. Whatever time you're watching this video, welcome to another episode of Greg Blends. Now, recently, one of my favorite YouTubers, Jazza, has decided to do a contest.
Specifically, I've decided to run a competition where early in the new year, 7 lucky winners will have their channel and a video featured on this channel.
I've been a huge fan of Jazza for a long time, so this is actually a really cool opportunity. Also, the 7 winners will get a mega bundle, as well as a signed copy of one of his books, and I need that book.
But you are not less likely to win if you have a small budget or a tiny audience. All you have to do is make an art or creativity-based YouTube video, and just think about the type of content I make or celebrate on this channel. A while back, I got my face 3D scanned. And I have my face. I finally have a second face. And I put a lot of effort to making him look as much like me as possible, and I hope you like the result. Just kidding. He's over there. This was the closest thing to an avatar that I had. Anyone who's watched a video from 4 or so years ago will recognize this dude. I used him in the Teeny Weeny Challenge, drawing a picture half the size of every picture. This was a collab I did with Anne from How to Cook That, where I pancaked my face. Uh-oh, it's sticking to my thing. I'm just gonna go for this. I drew a version of the Jazza avatar out of the word Jazza. The first thing I ever sculpted in ZBrush. It was also one of my first polymer clay experiments. We have the version of the avatar I drew using 3 million dots. Very recently, I corrupted some coloring books and replaced some frozen characters with the Jazza avatar. This is Sim Jazza. Bam! You ready? This is it. This is it. This is the moment.
So I thought, well, what could be more Jazza than making Jazza? So I've decided to sculpt Jazza in Blender. Now, in a previous video I've said, and I'm not even that good at sculpting, but I think I can manage a Thomas the Tank Engine face. So I'm not exactly the best 3D sculptor. So you might be wondering why I would decide to do something I'm not that good at for Jazza's challenge. And that's a good question. I was hoping you would know. Leave it in the comments below if you know why I would decide to sculpt Jazza. And with that out of the way, let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we have to do is a little bit of prep work before we start sculpting. Here I'm using the Quick Mask tool on an image of Jazza I found on Google Images, and I'm basically getting a nice clean cutout, including some of the hairs, so that we can use it in Blender. Next, I use the ruler feature in Photoshop, and I rotate and skew and align Jazza's face to be roughly straight so we can sculpt around something that's pretty much symmetrical. Now that we have it inside Blender, we basically just have to make a primitive kind of shape to sculpt on top of. So it doesn't have to be perfect, it's going to change drastically as we start sculpting. But the goal is basically just to follow the jawline and the shape of the skull. I extrude out the chin and then make a basic neck and shoulder area. But this is just so we can sculpt on top of it. So now that we're actually going to start sculpting, I basically have the image, the reference image, completely in front of the sculpting material, and then I usually start with the nose and I trace up to the brows. I start building out the cheeks a little bit, and at this stage it's all about adding material and then smoothing it out. So I add a bunch to the forehead and then I immediately smooth it out, and it's just really altering between those two tools. Initially when I start, just add a bunch of material and then smooth it out. Now a lot of sculptors, they like to start with the biggest details first. So a lot of people would say maybe I jumped the gun by putting the mouth in there, but I'm actually not putting in the final mouth. The way that I like to work is I'll put in like some of the higher resolution detail just so I can kind of see where I'm at and kind of feel comfortable about how things are progressing forwards. Now, ultimately, I'll probably end up redoing the smile like 4 or 5 times. It'll probably get completely obliterated while I'm working on other stuff. And it's just kind of, I like to do some of those high frequency details as a placeholder knowing that it's not going to be there forever. But I get really freaked out when I'm sculpting something and like the mouth isn't there, and then I can't really tell in my mind if the proportions look correct or whatever. So now I'm starting to use the crease tool as well to kind of add some more definition for around the cheeks and the dimples are. I really obsessed a lot of time with the smile. Now, one thing that you guys should know is, I think I mentioned already that this is my first time doing a human sculpt. I've done characters before, and I've usually had very good results with, you know, kind of cartoon characters and stuff like that, but I've never tried to do a photorealistic human before. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is most people who use sculpting software would use a drawing tablet. I actually kind of want to pick up one of the Huion, not a sponsor, tablets that Jazza talks about, because I do have a Microsoft Surface, which I really like, but I usually just don't feel like using a laptop. I just kind of want to use my actual computer. I have a desktop, so it would be nice to have a screen that I could draw on, but that is actually just attached to my desktop. So I'd like to pick up one of those. I do have a Intuos Wacom, which gives you pressure sensitivity, and when you're sculpting, pressure sensitivity is super important. Now, right here is where my day one ended, and you can see the jawline was way too strong. Little features, little details here and there were not right, but I came back the next day and I carried on, and it's one of those things where when you walk away from your work and you come back, you just see things differently, because you can get so absorbed into like the details that you forget to see the big picture. And then when you walk away from it and come back a day later, you see the big picture and you're like, oh, I immediately have like a list of like a dozen things I need to change. So the previous day ended with me trying to really obsess kind of like on the lips and nose area, and I kind of overworked it a little bit. And then when I really took the step back, I was like, okay, his jawline is too strong right now. The neck is way too far forwards. There probably should be a little bit more fat around the cheeks, not too much more, but a little bit more. And I basically just tweaked it more and more and more until I was happy. Now, like I said, so, you know, it doesn't look super Jazza-ish right now, but we still have a long way to go. And in the next step, called Retopology, we're actually going to make another mesh on top of this sculpt. So let's start retopologizing. In a previous video, I helped a stranger on the internet learn how to retopologize a 3D scan. So here we have a 3D scan of a Yoshi amiibo, and I basically go over in real time. If you watch this video, it's like 2 hours long, but it shows every step of the way how I make a really clean mesh on top of a very ugly 3D scan mesh. And when you do a sculpt or you do a 3D scan, you're always going to have geometry that's really ugly. Like you can see that I'm adding these little squares here. They're called quads, and I'm trying to deliberately design them so that they have nice edge flow throughout the face. But when you get a 3D scan or when you get a sculpt, the edge flow is, well, first, it's a bunch of really, really, really tiny triangles, so it's a waste of space, but also it's just random and all over the place. So there are ways you can do the retopologizing automatically. In the newer versions of Blender, there's actually a new retopo tool which kind of does a lot of things automatic, but I like to do it the old school way because that's how I was trained and that's what I'm comfortable with, and ultimately at the end of the day, I feel like a human's going to do a little bit better job than AI. So once I have the mesh retopologized, it's time to put some textures on it. Now this is going to be a two-step process. The first thing I do is I cut off half of Jazza's face, because that's what you do. But I'm doing that so that I can mirror the UV vertices. And after I project them from the front, I deselect the face vertices so that I can move the back half of the head to a different area. I then go in from the front view on the vertices and I just kind of, tweak them to fit the shape of the lips, the shape of the jawline, the nose, and so forth, and basically just try to tweak it. So what's really cool is because we sculpted around this reference photo, everything pretty much lined up really, really well. So then I could project that reference photo on the front side of our sculpt. Of course, the back side and the direct sides, the left and right ear and everything, are not going to have any color data because it wasn't present in the photo. So what I'm doing here is I'm unwrapping a second time, but this time my unwrap isn't simply projecting from the front. I actually do a more complicated unwrap where I add some red seams. So if you look at the model right there, you just missed it maybe, but there was some red lines on the model, and those were seams. And you can think if this was being made out of a single piece of cloth, that's where the pieces of cloth would be joined. So I do a more complex UV unwrap, and then I sample some of his skin here, and I make a very basic repeating texture so that I could use this to paint like the back of the neck, the ears, and other places that weren't in the original source photo. So it can, I skipped the footage in the editing, but I basically use his skin from the front side of his face to go all the way around. Now here I kind of cheated, but I had already spent like a dozen hours on this project, so I found a royalty-free open source 3D scan of this random guy that I thought looks kind of Jazza-ish. Perhaps maybe not the same style. I don't know if Jazza has arm tattoos. That would kind of be a funny episode, Jazza just tattooing himself. But so the cool thing is this Turbo Squid file was completely royalty free, and I don't even have to credit them. But of course, they're here in the video, so they're going to be credited. So I basically just imported that scan, and I made it roughly the same size as Jazza's face, so that it was, human-like proportions. I throw on the texture and make a quick material. Of course, I cut Jazza's face in half earlier, so now I have to cut this guy's head completely off. But now I just, kind of tweak Jazza's face so his shoulders and neck kind of fit in this new body, and it doesn't look too bad. I use Blender's equivalent of the clone stamp tool to go and get rid of some of this camo pattern. I want to have a more basic shirt in a completely different color, so I'm just getting rid of this detail. And what's really cool is Blender's texture painting has a clone stamp, so I just go in and get rid of the camo patterns here. There's a logo on the back of the neck, and then I go in and clean up those tattoos as well. Once I save this image in Blender, it'll save and overwrite the file on the disk that I got from the scan, so then I can go and take it into Photoshop here and start editing it. So the first thing I do is use the quick mask tool to go in and select basically just where the shirt is. And then once I have that, I use the brightness levels and the hue saturation to make it a nice dark black shirt. I'll reload the texture in Blender, and we see it worked. So the next thing I do is I change the Nikes to be from mustard yellow to Jazza red, and I also change the skin tone to be a nice pasty Jazza. So with that, I basically smooth out where the pocket was for the t-shirt. I'm sorry, Jazza, I felt like this guy was maybe a little bit too ripped for you, so I smoothed that out as well. I also smooth out where the necklace was, because there was a crucifix or whatever, and I got rid of that as well. And of course, the most important detail. So I take my time with this one, and I go really, really slow to make sure I get it perfect. And I just project that texture using texture painting onto our image texture. So at this point, I'm really happy with our results. Off screen, I tweak the materials a little bit more, but finally, I just want to make a basic set, get a camera set up and pointing at Jazza. I found some online free materials for the brick wall as well as the wood floor, and I basically just threw those in there, simple PBR textures, set up some quick lights, set up a couple spotlights, and I got rendering working. So this was really the last step before I was pretty much done with my Jazza sculpt. So without further ado, we will check out the results. All right, let's take a look at my result. Now, of course, I have to have some dramatic lighting, but here we go. We have our final render, and of course, I have kind of like the runway music going, just kind of for fun. But right here, I'm just kind of doing like a nice long panning shot where I show my final model from various angles, but I do have some self-critiques. For example, because I used a 3D scan from online for the body, it only had one material for the entire body. And because I was trying to optimize for realism and I was trying to optimize for the human skin material, I ended up putting some subsurface scattering on that 3D scan. But that meant that subsurface scattering was applied to the Nikes as well as the pants as well as the shirt, and that made some of those textures look a little bit off. And If it were up to me, I would have had more time to work on this project. I literally started this project the day Jazza announced the contest, and I literally am submitting it the last very day of the contest. You know, obviously I have things to do with, you know, to do in regular life, such as work and getting over the flu, as well as various other things. But I tried to use my time wisely, and if I had more time, I would have worked on the materials for the 3D scan more, so that I could have a better cloth texture for the pants and for the shirt, and made a more detailed texture for the shoe as well. But those things considered, I feel like it still came out really good. The main texturing work was done on Jazza's face, and then the kind of body was actually kind of an afterthought. I was considering just ending this video with just the sculpt, but I needed to do that because my original plan was to actually make Jazza dance. But like I said, I ran out of time, so I didn't have that opportunity. So I settled on making an army of Jazzas and having them nod their head to the beat. Originally I wanted to try to rig and animate the Jazza and have him do some things like the floss dance and various other things, but I was doing the head nod 2 days before this was due, and I'm literally exporting the file the day that it's due. So I wanted to do more with this, but you know, life got in the way. But so we're going to settle for an awesome army of Jazzas nodding their head to the beat, and also reminding you to like, comment, and subscribe to Jazza, of course, and maybe me if I win. You don't have to. Just subscribe to Jazza because he's awesome, and like and comment, etc. So overall, this was like a couple weeks worth of effort. I really enjoyed this because, like I said, this was my first time sculpting a human, which I'm really super proud about. I mean, it didn't come out perfect, but it did come out, and I am really happy with the results. So I hope you enjoyed watching my process, and I'll see you next time.